What if I told you making a podcast was a lot more easier than you think? And it's all thanks to Anchor. Anchor is a platform with creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They also distribute your podcast to multiple platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you can get your podcast needs. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership, and it's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. You can find it at anchor.fm, anchor.fm, or you can even look it up on your mobile device app stores and find it that way to get started with your podcast today. Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Views from the Mitten podcast. Hope everybody's having a very, very good Friday. And over the past 4 days, there's been a lot, and by a lot, I mean a fair amount of NBA news that I'm going to discuss today. But first things first, I'm pretty sure this news broke today, but Kemba Walker has been traded. Yep, Kemba Walker has been traded to the OKC Thunder for Al Horford and Moses Brown, more or less in a sense, because, I mean, there was also the 16th pick that the Celtics owned being moved to the Thunder in exchange for, 16th pick and the 2025 second-round pick that they moved to the Thunder. And in return, they got a 2023 second-round pick with the players involved. So the trade obviously makes sense cap-wise for the Celtics because they freed up $73 million, I believe, in cap space that they don't have to pay Kemba anymore. But they do take on Al Horford's hefty contract, which they didn't want to deal with before when they had Al Horford on hand. So that's kind of weird. But also just the confusing part of, like, I don't see the point of why Moses Brown was involved in this deal. I really liked Moses Brown and what he could have and what he grew into over the last season. And I feel like the Celtics, like I've always said, they're pretty much a center away that at least knows somewhat what they're doing with some length on them, and then they can probably make some moves. And I feel like the Celtics just really got a lot better with this deal. I mean, Al Horford obviously is nothing spectacular, but Al Horford, his family loves Boston. He played fairly good in Boston, I'd say, or as far as like just his defensive presence was something that they missed when they were moving from like Tice to Tristan in a sense. Robert Williams kind of filled that void, but he's barely healthy, so it's hard to really tell. But Moses Brown definitely kind of moved the needle for them. I wouldn't say he's completely on track for this, but I kind of look at him as like a Miles Turner type of center. Very good defensively, can get rebounds, putbacks, and he just moves. And at the Thunder, it just kind of throws me off as far as what they're going to do in the draft this year, because they now have, I think, 3 picks in the first round, which the pick that they actually own has the potential to be the number 1 pick, which most people would see as, say, a Cade Cunningham in a way. But with pick 16, and I think they have like a pick another pick in the 20s, but I'm not sure. I wonder what they do to replace the void that they have at big, unless they trade Kemba in exchange for a big from somebody else. I don't really know what their plans are, but once again, Sam Presti is just stacking up picks. That's really him stacking up picks, and Brad Stevens kind of taking from Danny Ainge is what I got from this deal. Because Brad Stevens pretty much moved up a couple of roles and landed them Moses Brown while moving salary for Kemba. That's actually a really good deal for one of your first like decisions as like the leader of the basketball operations. That's a really good pick up, should I say, for Brad Stevens and the Celtics. But the Thunder obviously aren't going to keep Walker, like I said earlier. They plan on moving him elsewhere immediately. I don't know if it'll be a buyout or just like another team like the Lakers or something, or maybe the Heat move him in exchange for like some young assets and some more picks, probably more picks. But yeah, outside of the Moses Brown move, I feel like the Thunder have somewhat of a good idea of what they want to do. I mean, they didn't move Pokusevski, they didn't move SGA, they didn't move anybody. I guess you say significant importance. They didn't move Dort. Like, there's a lot of players that were more important to, I guess, the rebuild and the building block foundation that they were doing than Moses Brown. But that is one big hole that I feel like they're going to kind of miss when the next season rolls around, because he was developing into a really good player. So the Celtics really got to steal, in my opinion. The Celtics got to steal. And of course, Al Horford coming back, fans love him. His family loves it. He loves it. It's should be pretty interesting to see how both teams fare in the rest of the offseason as far as who signs who and whatever. Back to more player information. Kyle Kuzma. Now, Kyle Kuzma has been in trade discussions, I think, almost ever since the Lakers have been eliminated. And it's not like he knows he's going to get moved, but no one just knows where. And I've seen the Thunder, of course, and the Kings. And I thought the Thunder probably would have pulled the trigger. I mean, they still can, because the Lakers do want another point guard. So Kuzma could still end up in OKC, which I feel like is more ideal for his growth as a player, because for one, they're still not going to be the greatest team next year. So it gives him time to expand on things in his game, like his shooting, his decision making, probably tune up his defense a little bit more, because they're going to have to play a lot of defense. Well, obviously they have to play a lot all the time, but just with the Thunder, them guys move around the court a lot. So, but the Kings also, now that I kind of pondered on the situation, really wouldn't be that bad either. I mean, you have De'Aaron Fox, you have Buddy Hield. I think Buddy Hield's still there under contract, I believe, for a few more seasons. Halliburton definitely was an added spunk to the team with their with guard play. Halliburton's just been he has done a really good season before he went down. Rashawn Holmes is one of the weirdest players, not just based off him as a person, but just he really fits the Kings in a way that I don't think I didn't really expect it to. I mean, Rashawn Holmes has really never been a bad player, but with the Kings, he fits really well as to what they want to do. Now, Bagley is, of course, one of the glaring issues as far as his health and his development, because he hasn't been able to play. But I mean, in theory, that'd be a nice little core of, at least if they have Fox, Hield, Halliburton, and Kuzma, that wouldn't be that bad of a building block. And plus, they still have their draft pick as well. I don't know if they're going to be top 10 or anything. They're probably definitely top 10. I don't know if it's anything past 5, though, depending on how the lottery shakes up. But yeah, Kuzma, I've never really looked at Kuzma as a bad player from the early stages of the Lakers when he was playing with Lonzo. I didn't really see anything bad with him. But, of course, when you have guys like LeBron on your team, there's more eyes on you. There's more people nitpicking your every decision, your flaws and everything. But Kuzma, everybody knows Kuzma's a decently solid player. He's decent. As far as he still has room to grow. I think he's only 2 or 3 years in. Maybe 4, I'm not sure. But he still has room to develop. And whichever team kind of gets him, it'll obviously probably be a rebuilding team that he gets sent to in exchange for a star or something that they have already. So Kuzma should fare pretty well. I feel like most improved is in his future, depending on what team he goes to. Kind of like a Julius Randle up climb, I'd see. Because Julius Randle really wasn't ever bad at one point. It was just, him having to build himself up. And then you get stuff like the Knicks, where even though they kind of lost in the playoffs with the pressure and stuff, throughout the season, Julius Randle was very, very vital to them even getting that high of a seeding going into the playoffs. So I'd say keep an eye out for Kuzma, depending on what team he lands on, because Kuzma definitely can develop. I wouldn't say just flat out just all-star potential, but Kuzma can probably develop into a really solid player in the NBA if given the right situation, right circumstances. He could probably go crazy. Another player who's going through potentially being moved is Kristaps Porzingis. Now, I've seen from somewhere that Porzingis is not enjoying playing with the Mavericks, which is very, very clear. If you kind of looked at the stuff they did on the floor, it's who would enjoy just being told, hey, we need you to sit in the corner, rotate, cut if need be. But if you do cut, you get sat down. It's a lot of things that I can see Kristaps not enjoying. And then plus just the usage rate of Luka, like I've previously discussed in the past. Luka's usage rate is way too high for the talent that's on that team, or for the at least starting talent that they have on that team. And Porzingis, even though he hasn't been the healthiest, he could have really played a vital piece if just like plays was written up for him, or he was able to move around. He did more things like on ball, shoot some pick and pops. Like there's like ways to utilize a dude that's 7'3" with his caliber of style. But with intentions of him potentially being on the move, I've seen that the Hornets are interested in trading for Porzingis, which I honestly think is not a bad idea. You put Porzingis with, I'd say one of their guards is gonna have to go. I don't know if it'd be Rozier or Graham. It'll probably be Graham because I feel like Rozier and Ball worked a little bit better together than than I'd say Graham did. But you take that, you put Porzingis with PJ Washington, LaMelo, Gordon Hayward when he's back and healthy. That's a pretty Malik Monk. Like there's a lot of like potential with that team as far as just deep. I wouldn't say like deep playoff runs, but at least they can make the playoff a couple of years in a row. Just based off the fact of LaMelo's only going to get better. You put more talent around him, then there's more stuff that he can learn. And then plus, Cody Zeller isn't a bad center, but if you move him to the bench, your team probably still gets a lot better because Cody Zeller is a fairly scrappy center. He gets in there, he does what he got to do. Bismack Biyombo probably will be moved too if that trade was to occur. But I feel like Porzingis would need that. It's kind of like how Gordon was when he went from moving on from the Celtics, where you kind of find yourself again because now you're being relied on a little bit more. Like Gordon hadn't had that much like weight on him since he had been in Utah, where he's going out there, he's dropping 30 points, 35, 40, stuff like that. He went back to being a high usage player in a system that needed him to do so. You throw in Porzingis in that mix, and with a guy like that out in Charlotte, you best believe they're going to want to use him to his fullest ability, keeping him healthy, and not only healthy but involved in the game. So I feel like that would be a really good destination for him. Outside of that, I can't really think of any other teams that could move things for him. It's like I would think Raptors, but I mean, Kyle Lowry is probably for sure going to a championship contending team. I doubt he goes to Dallas in exchange for Porzingis, but the Heat want everybody, so I mean that wouldn't be too far out of the realm either. But Porzingis is for sure going to be. It's for sure a lot of players to watch that haven't been moved yet or that have the potential to be moved. Like I think Bradley Beal has an extension potentially over the summer that the Wizards are going to act on. So a lot of things could potentially happen. A lot of shakeups could happen. And speaking of more shakeups, we have Rick Carlisle, who decided to step down from the coaching job of the Mavs. Now, I was discussing with a few people over the past couple of days as far as I always kind of thought that one of them were going to be moved. And by one of them, I mean Porzingis was either going to get moved or Carlisle was going to like step down or get fired, one of the two. And potentially both are going to happen. I'm pretty sure because Porzingis isn't happy. But with Rick stepping down and then with the way the playoffs kind of unfolded as far as it came down to what he was doing with the team, and you can kind of say it was a little out of touch or just, a little bit too protective of their technically their second best player, should have been the second best player. But I've seen things where it might have been, due to conflict with Luka, because I've seen Luka heard that Luka's had issues with coaching and just the GM as a whole for just like, just like minor things that they're just not doing with as far as like building the team around them. And stiff rotation patterns I've seen also be a problem, which makes sense because, it took halfway through the playoff stint for Boban to actually start, which kind of always threw me off because, I mean, Willie Cauley-Stein is not bad, but, I mean, I would definitely have Boban in the starting lineup if I was them. But they eventually ended up doing it. I don't think Trey Burke's minutes have really, like, increased because Brunson and Tim Hardaway kind of, juggle that. Even forward depth, shoot, they have like I don't know if Josh Green has ever played an NBA game yet. the guy they got out of Arizona. I don't know if he's played a game yet. So it's a lot of things about that really could have went against Rick, and just Rick wanting to have a new scenery because, he's been there for a long, long time. Like, he was there for Dirk, Jay Kidd, and Tyson's championship run. He was there for a lot of things. And, sometimes the team just passes you by with, like, the new regime, or not even new regime, but, like, just the new roster that you're dealing with. Like, Luka is a very solid player, but he's not one of those guys where you can kind of, like, look at him and be like, all right, he's going to be our Dirk. And just, we're going to put the ball in his hands a majority of the time, and things are still going to happen. Like, wins and stuff are going to happen. It's not going to happen with him because he likes to pass, or he has the ability to pass. So you would want to amplify that a little bit more. So it takes the pressure off of him, and everybody gets to see the ball a little bit more. And then also on top of that, I seen before I even started recording that Dirk Nowitzki got brought on as an advisor for them. So he's helping them I think they're finding a new GM and a head coach. So should be interesting to see what Dirk puts together as far as, like, who they find and stuff like that. Kind of like how Brad Stevens was in a way, as far as, like, helping the Celtics try to find their new head coach. It should be interesting to see who they try to fill those voids with. And I trust Dirk in a way. I trust Dirk as far as, at least with the head coach, because GM is obviously, like, that's up in the air. You might have to poach him from somebody else, kind of like how I can't think of an example of like a GM that kind of like got moved up from another team or something like that. Off the top of my head, I can't think of it, but I'm most definitely going to keep an eye on, like, what the Mavericks do. Probably starting from the coach, because the coach, it always starts with that. As far as, which coach is going to amplify the usage rate of the whole team and not just Luka Doncic, because that's going to be the deciding thing moving forward with them. Is everybody going to be included in the offensive plan? Because Tim Hardaway has proven that he can put up buckets. You got Trey Burke, spark plug off the bench. Jalen Brunson, in the minutes that he's been given, has done his thing. And I'm trying to think, Dorian Finney-Smith. I couldn't think of his name in the beginning stages of me talking about this. But, there's talent on that roster that either needs to be amplified or needs to get shifted around. So the Mavericks are definitely not in a full-on rebuild, but at least, going a new direction scheme wise, I'd say. Next we have something regarding the All-NBA. Now, the All-NBA first, second, and third teams came out. I don't remember the whole list off the top of my head. I know Curry and Jokic were on the first team. Second team, I believe Randall, Embiid. Like, I only remember like two people, like, probably for each one. And then for the third team, Jimmy Butler, Rudy Gobert, Beal, like, those were the names that were around for the third team. But a lot of people were saying that the system might be flawed with the way they're selecting these players through vote, which left out glaring people when you bring up Donovan Mitchell, who was having a very, very good season, Devin Booker, who for sure was having a very, very strong season, and then Jason Tatum, who a lot of people thought that, he definitely should have made it. And not only just because of how he played with the 50-point game. I think he had like 2 50-point games or a 40-point game closing out the season, and then went to the playoffs and dropped like 6. He went crazy point-wise is what I'm trying to get at. But not only that, based off his play, but the fact that people's contracts have like All-NBA, like first, second, third team berths as incentives in their contracts. So players are losing out on money for their extensions, like their Supermax contract extensions. They're losing out on money by not being selected for these All-NBA teams. And they could probably say selective. Oh yeah, because I think Bron was on second team, and Bron barely played around 40 games and still somehow managed to make it on the second team. Whereas, or even like a Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Butler did really well in the regular season. Postseason was a different story. But regular season wise, he did his thing. But a lot of people could see Booker went crazy. Chris Paul made it. for I believe the second team as well, and just no Booker, no Tatum, no Mitchell, like the three most promising players going into the postseason for their respective teams, and these guys are just not even there. And more or less, I don't feel like it should be a voting issue. I mean, voting obviously is flawed, because even when you go back to like all-star voting, you can say that the deciding voters really don't know what they're doing, or really don't know like who deserves what, and they're just picking off names and namesake notoriety, whatever you want to call it, money. Um, but I feel like more or less it comes down to how the contracts are structured. Whereas you shouldn't always be looking at like the way the incentives are structured. I'd say incentives based off of like how they play on the floor, or if they make an all-star game and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of that stuff is kind of neutral, but I feel like when it comes to like all NBA and stuff like that, like that's really something that a player has no control over. It doesn't matter how good he plays, because Bradley Beal put up 32 or 31 points a game as an average and was third team. That stat line alone, you would think warrants all NBA first team eligibility, but it didn't. So it doesn't matter how good they really play, because you're still going to get placed wherever they want you to be placed at, based off of like, how your team did, or just, your percentages, how vital you were when the team like didn't have you or whatever. There's a lot of things that play into that. But when it comes to adding on money to a contract, I don't think it should matter that much, because if the guy's really leading your team or helping you get clutch victories that if he wasn't there for it, you would have lost, that should be deciding if he gets more money or not, especially in the case of Tatum, where the Celtics were looking down bad without Jaylen Brown, one of their key forwards. Jason Tatum willed that team on to at least win a game. I'm not sure if they won like more than one game in that Nets series off the top of my head, but he willed them to a victory against the Nets by himself, pretty much, or dang near by himself. So with guys like that, you kind of just have to look at their production and not even think about the incentives for the contract, because it's always going to be a thing. Because I remember Clint Capella's incentives came out when he had his extension from the Rockets, like something to do with like how many blocks he got and rebounds and doubles. I can't really remember that either, but those things really shouldn't affect the money that these players are getting. If they're playing great basketball, then that should be what it should be determined off of when you think about re-signing, like re-up into a supermax after their rookie deal. If they fulfill, if they reach their expectations throughout their rookie campaign, or throughout the time that they've been on a rookie deal, re-up their money. Like, it shouldn't be, oh, he's playing really well, but he didn't make an All-NBA first, second, or third team. He didn't make the All-Star game. He didn't average 25 points a game. Like, if he's helping you win games, it should be determined off of that. It shouldn't be based off of anything like award-wise, because all of those things are very much cherry-picked, or not even like cherry-picked, but I'd say, I don't know. It's a slippery slope, because Julius Randle, Tom Thibodeau, couldn't get his name out for a second. Yeah, like those guys, won respective awards. Most improved for Julius, and Coach of the Year for Tom Thibodeau, and they lost to the Hawks. Now I know it's a regular season award, but I mean, it makes you kind of think like, could have probably given it to somebody else, or it could have been like, everybody rode the wave of how good other teams were doing, or how good the team played, and they got awards based off of momentum and hype and stuff like that. It's not really based off of growth in most cases, whereas like a Tatum or a Mitchell or even a Booker, who takes multiple steps each and every year, somehow gets slighted for little things like all NBA teams or even all-star appearances. Like Devin Booker hasn't completely made an all-star voting, like all-star game like roster completely on its own. Like, he's always been like somebody's replacement. Why is he always a replacement? You know what I'm saying? Like, he's way better than being a replacement. So that's something they really need to look into, as far as just, I wouldn't say like the voting system needs to get like what it actually does need to get restructured. Very much so needs to get restructured. but also just how they incentivize the players' contracts to get them to, I guess you say, reach their full potential. You can't have that included until that probably gets sorted out because that's going to always be a damper on how much a player gets in extra. So I'd probably just, cut it out from incentive list for the foreseeable time being. Then again, it might get fixed in the off season because they obviously do have a lot of things to discuss. And speaking of things that they need to discuss, it's something from the NBA competition committee that they're looking into as far as a rule to stop players from leaning backwards and sideways to draw fouls. And the players they use as an example were Trae Young and James Harden. Now, this is low-key a touchy topic. Not touchy, but like a funny topic. Because honestly, I feel like James Harden, it more or less is directed towards him because he sells a lot when it comes to getting foul calls, especially like on like shot attempts or like leaning layups and stuff like that. But it's also just really hard to tell like if the guy's being extra when he's moving or if the guy just literally is like, because some guys probably like train and just, their body just naturally turns a certain direction when they take the shot up. Like I feel like Trae Young, just because of the way he's built, it naturally might look like he like turns himself sideways when he's shooting because everybody weighs more than him at this point. Dang near. They weigh more than him, they're taller. Like he can get shifted when it comes to his movement. A guy like Harden who kind of pushes his way through the lane, or a guy that kind of, has a little bit more weight to him, a little bit more oomph when he's driving to the basket, you can kind of tell that he's maneuvering himself in a position to get the whistle. But I doubt anything changes when it comes to this because there's a lot of issues with foul calls that they need to sort out. Maybe even adding more challenges. Like, cause I feel like one challenge is like, of course you have to be smart with it, kind of like how it is in football. But I mean, it's like, I feel like with basketball, there's a couple of times in a game where you could look at it play and be like, okay, this really wasn't a foul, or this man was clearly out of bounds and just nobody saw it. And then there's things like that you have to just take on the chin. And that should definitely be something that they look into, or at least adding more cameras. When you look at like dudes going out of bounds or backcourt violations, travels, like you're gonna do other things besides worry about the players leaning backwards and sideways, because it's better than the original thing where you had like Reggie Miller and stuff like that, literally like kicking their feet out and hoping that they got fouled that way, because then you guys like Bruce Bowen that, get dirty on them, undercut them, hurt their ankles or whatever. So it's better than that, I'd say. But there's probably going to be like a minor tweak to it, like potentially like I feel like for the ones where they lean backwards, that might be a potential offensive foul moving forward. Sideways, I feel like it's hard to call. Like unless it's on like a jump shot, yeah, like a jump shot. I guess you can say like when they kind of lean in and the guys are like on the opposite side and they kind of like jump into the player. That's 50-50. But I feel like when it comes to like layups and stuff, layups when they're moving sideways, it's okay. Like I feel like a lot of players, they might be leaning for contact, but on a layup, you're trying to create contact. On a jump shot, you really shouldn't be leaning sideways or backwards in that case. So, jump shot wise, it'll probably be an adjustment, or there probably will be adjustments, but the overall movement as a whole it depends on the player. Like, there's some guys that literally like foul hunt, and you can vividly see that they're foul hunting. But some players, if they're just small, or like in a Chris Paul case where like they're just really, really crafty and can just make the slightest bit of movement look like it's a justifiable foul. That's just how the game is played. Like Chris Paul literally puts his body in front of people and draws fouls that way. And it's a mixture of like his craftiness and just the fact of like he's using his size to his advantage. He's a small guy. So if he gets in the way of the average player and he's not paying attention, he's getting mowed over. So easy foul for him. And that's just, like I said, it goes down to the craftiness of the player and just, how the team works as a whole. And lastly, Y'all know the drill at this point. We're gonna discuss the NBA playoffs and what's been going on at this point, what still is going on, and obviously Bucks and Nets, Jazz and Clippers, and Sixers and Hawks because the Suns ended up getting the sweep. So and it's funny because at the time that I'm recording this, the Sixers and Hawks game is going on at this very moment, and the Hawks are in the lead right now. So I'm very happy about that because if you can't tell, I've had the Hawks, making a fairly deep run, but it is the first quarter. You never know what can happen. But I'm not going to start with that. I'm going to start with the Clippers and Jazz series, which has been an eye opener for two things. The Jazz without Donovan Mitchell, obviously, kind of like how you would say Jamal Murray is to the Nuggets. Donovan Mitchell, when he's not really playing like really well, it dampers the Jazz's chances of winning games. But also there's situations where you can just say, oh, Paul George is playing up to his contract, which he very much is. He's playing up to his contract with a 37-point outing in the last game that they played, but also just the very odd importance of the three role players that I'm going to name right now: Marcus Morris, Nicholas Batum, and Reggie Jackson. Very much are just really, really key deciding factors when you look at just not only the offensive. Well, I put like this: Reggie's mainly offensive because I'm pretty sure that's mainly what he's there for, but defensively because Batum, Batum doesn't get many stops, but he makes stuff hard. Same with Marcus Morris. It's like a 50-50 between either he gets a stop or he just makes the shot really, really hard to hit. But offensively, Reggie Jackson made some of the ridiculously clutch shots I've ever seen. He pump faked like 4 times with the shot clock running down and made a 3. It was like 2 different corner variations. They get a wing 3 and a corner 3 leading up to that point. But it's just crazy that you would think the Clippers would be not down bad, but they would be a little out the loop when you take out a guy like Kawhi. But I mean, Paul George is showing a little bit of the old Paul George as far as that guy that can drop 30 plus and lead your team to a victory. Because really, it was just him, Jackson, Morris, Mann, and Batum scoring wise, because Kennard played 20 minutes, only gave you 6 points, 17 minutes played by Patrick Beverley, and he gave you 5 points. I'm not sure what his steals and stuff look like, so I'm not going to even judge that, but no one's really looking at Beverley for offense at this point in his career. Zubac was playing, I think, limited minutes, and Rondo had 4 rebounds and 2 assists with 9 minutes played. So it's really more or less, of course, they're going to Game 7, as obvious as that could be, or at least I think. No, there's game. That was Game 5 last night. So Game 6 is potentially like you can either end the series or the Jazz could push it to 7. I, for one, kind of hope the Jazz push it to 7. Not really for the Jazz at this point, but mainly just to see like if Chris Paul can kind of drag out this protocol a little bit more for a couple more days, and then you got that little brace period depending if the Hawks series goes to 7, stuff like that. It all depends, but the Jazz definitely need to figure something out. And then, of course, you have the looming thing of I've seen Donovan Mitchell is listed as questionable for the game as far as his right ankle has been giving him a lot of problems. Now, Bogdanovich just showed up. He showed up in the last game with 30, 31, or 32 points. So scoring really is going to have to be relying on like him, Ingles, Royce, Jordan, Clarkson. And without Conley, you kind of do lose 2 floor leaders with a lot of scoring ability when you kind of take those 2 out. Or I think Conley might be able to return. I'm not sure about that one. But, you lose a lot in the backcourt when you take Mitchell and Conley out of the equation. But the Clippers could potentially close this out tonight. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, especially with the way, like I said earlier, Reggie Jackson's been playing really, really efficient ball. Paul George is, coming back to form with Kawhi being down. Hopefully Kawhi for them comes back for the conference finals, stuff like that. But should be pretty interesting to see what happens in that game tonight because it's really going to be like an interesting thing if like all four of these games, or if like three series and I'm going to seven regarding the semis, because the Nets and Bucks are already going to seven. Um, Hawks and Sixers could potentially be a closeout game tonight, but if anything, if all goes well for a fan's perspective, they're going to seven. So it should be pretty interesting to see what happens with that. Nets and Bucks. Speaking of them, this series has been actually very, very enjoyable over since like almost I think like game. What was the last game where they had like min 80? Yeah, like ever since game three, I've really been enjoying the Nets and Bucks series. Not only just because of like Kevin Durant's scoring prowess, because Kevin Durant is freaking ridiculous, but the Bucks have almost kind of like had to make so many adjustments throughout this series to keep themselves alive. And I'm for one, as because a lot of people say Coach Bud doesn't make adjustments. Well, the last game they played, he made a couple of adjustments. They attacked the idea that Harden wasn't going to be as limber moving with his hamstring. When it comes to like defensively, like pushing up on him, making them have to make rash movements or whatever. And the defense on KD has been definitely a lot better down the stretch with PJ Tucker guarding him and Chris Middleton. They're getting more into him, more getting up under him, making things a little bit more difficult for him. Of course, KD is still dropping ridiculous buckets, but they're there. Like, you can't really be mad about that. But they're going to seven. The Bucks have always seemed like they had the recipe as far as like defensively stopping them, because there's some games they come out on fire, and then later on in the game, Joe Harris starts making shots and KD starts making shots, and the league gets cut, and now it's a semi-competitive game all over again. But the Bucks have to be able to, if they get a big lead in the seventh game, because they're going to the Barclays Center, like it's going back to Brooklyn. The last two games were in Milwaukee, I believe. So actually, let me see. I think the last two games were I think one of these games were a road game. Well, the Nets won that game, so it depends on like how that would map out. Because Middleton on the road is he's a hit or miss guy. Sometimes he's on fire. Well, mainly he's on fire from like the Milwaukee. Like when he go back to Milwaukee, he's on fire. But on the road, he's like still decent in production, but he's really not like as electric or as helpful when they go on the road. And with Giannis kind of figuring everything out now, as far as he's not chucking as many shots, he's actually, getting into the restricted area where his highest percentage shots are made from, like he's actually getting to his spots and making it harder for them. Now, his free throw routine might be, as long as it even is, or I don't even know that grammatically makes sense, but as long as his free throw routine is, he's getting to the line, which is something that you kind of want to see if you're a Bucks fan, just because, like, if he's even one or two, well, or two or two, that's still slowing the game down, and he's putting people in foul trouble. That's what you want for a guy like Giannis with his size. Like, shooting is good for the team, obviously, like, he's stretching the floor or whatever, but you want him to put pressure on the bigs to where you have to go to the backup, you have to go to the reserve, and then, like, after that, what do you have? You kind of want Giannis to chip away at those guys. Like, Blake Griffin's interior defense really isn't that strong. Nicholas Claxton's big, but he's not really like that big burly dude that's just sitting in the way like a wall. Because I think Drew Holiday moved him going up for a layup. Like, it's really not much stopping Giannis from getting to where he needs to be. So that's something that he really needs to attack, like home or on the road. Like, he just needs to attack that with the Nets, because KD's not really getting in the way that much either. Jeff Green was tasked with it, I think, the last game, but you kind of have to. It's a collaborative effort when you're trying to take down a guy like Giannis defensively. But if all goes well for the Bucks, as far as obviously the key factors being Chris Middleton shows up for a road game to close this series out, the Bucks should very much be in their conference finals. But if the Nets win, Kevin Durant, at this point, you can kind of definitely say he willed this team forward, because Harden is playing at like 50 to 60%. Kyrie's down for I don't know if Kyrie will be back for game 7, but if anything, he'll probably be out for the next 2 games, give or take, depending on how his recovery process is going, because he's been away from the team. But it's going to be a very interesting Game 7 just to see like what version of Chris Middleton we get, and then also on top of that, what version of KD do we get when pretty much his back's against the wall. Like if the Bucks come on a road just sparking in the Barclays Center, and they like KD has to answer, like it should be interesting to see what he does, because I wouldn't say KD's legacy is as much on the line as much as people would say Giannis's is, because I mean I don't believe it either when it comes to Giannis, but I do feel like being a 2-time MVP, a defensive player of the year, a lot of those things kind of do weigh on you a little bit to where it's like, okay, like you have all these accolades, but like where's the team progression, like conference finals, like finals appearances, like we need more from you. So it's very much more on Giannis and Middleton than it is on KD, obviously, but should be interesting to see what happens with that. And then lastly, like I discussed earlier with the game going on currently right now, I'm trying to finish this up. Sixers and Hawks. This has been a very enjoyable series as well, mainly because I love watching the Hawks play. Like the Trae Young, John Collins dynamic is very, very enjoyable to watch. Bogdanovich, Gallinari, spark plugs off the bench. I think Bogdan starts. Or Bogdan, something like that. I think he starts. But the Hawks have been a very, very scrappy team throughout this series, coming back from 20 plus and stuff like that. And the Sixers, obviously, you can kind of say, like, I wouldn't really say it's their closing ability. I would just say it's the fact that Ben Simmons, when it comes to the free throws or just shooting in general, he doesn't apply that much pressure when he's in the game. Now, that also could go to the fact of, like, maybe he's dealing with, like, an injury or whatever. Because I think in the last game, he, like, went straight to one of the trainers for the Sixers. Like, he might be dealing with something that's nagging him and he can't move the way he wants to. But you got guys like Seth Curry who are showing up. I think even Tyrese Maxey, not like having a major game, but had like some good games. Korkmaz, Dwight Howard with a little energy boost or whatever when it comes to like his defense. But mainly, it's been Joel Embiid. Joel and Tobias have been like big things for the Sixers in this series, and you kind of expected that, especially with Tobias kind of coming out hot in the beginning of games, but also Embiid, because you want like your guy that could have been potentially the MVP of the league. You kind of want him to be out there putting himself in positions to where he's like extending leads, or he's coming out and getting 17, 20 points in a quarter and just really making stuff happen for your team. But in this series, I don't know if it'll be I don't think it'll be enough, because I feel like the Hawks just want it more, especially like when it comes to like Trae Young, Capella, John Collins, like those guys. I feel like they just want it more, or just the ability that they've taken major hits from the Sixers and still are able to somehow make the game close. In a win or a loss, they're still somehow able to make the game close with a chance to make something happen. And that is something that you just really can't take away from a really, really young team. But aside from that, I need to eventually look at this game in a few minutes, actually. So that's going to be it for today's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of my other past episodes, make sure to, like the page, like the podcast page on Anchor. Also follow me on all the other platforms that the podcast is distributed on: Spotify, Overcast, Google Podcasts, what have you. Make sure, and also viewer support. If you want to see more things happen with the podcast, you can always support. I think it's linked in the bio for like the podcast itself. But I hope everybody has a very, very, very enjoyable weekend. Enjoy the games, and I will see you guys on the next episode. See ya.